On the morning of September 11, 2001, like most Americans, firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and construction workers were just going to work, trying to make an honest living and help out their community. What they didn't know was that that day would be the deadliest day for first responders in American history. When hijackers crashed 2 planes into the World Trade Center, these brave men and women rushed to the scene without hesitation. Now, almost 20 years later, we'd like to share with you their stories of heroism, bravery, and selflessness. Patrick Brown, a construction worker who worked on the World Trade Center site, recalled what he saw that day. At about 8:45 a.m., Patrick noticed a bright flash and heard a loud boom. He looked up and saw smoke coming from the top floors of the North Tower. Immediately, he thought it was a fuel tanker truck that had exploded. But then a colleague told him a plane had just crashed into the building. Although they were told to evacuate, Patrick and his crew stayed behind. And when they realized there were people trapped on the upper floors, they decided to help. With axes and sledgehammers in hand, they started climbing up the South Tower to rescue as many people as they could. Unfortunately, they never made it. As they reached the 78th floor, the South Tower collapsed. Miraculously, all 5 men survived, but the collapse crushed the stairwell they were using, trapping them between the 78th and 80th floors. They spent hours trapped in the rubble until they were finally rescued by firefighters. Sergeant Dave Yelpy was working in the Bronx when his radio crackled to life. His call sign was requested on an emergency channel. He drove to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel entrance, got on his motorcycle, and headed towards the World Trade Center. When he arrived, he saw a massive amount of smoke billowing from the Trade Center. He quickly joined the hundreds of other bikers escorting people away from the area. Later, when the order was given to evacuate Lower Manhattan, he led a group of nearly 100 people on foot across the Brooklyn Bridge. Sergeant Yelpy continued to work 12-hour shifts over the next several days, helping to secure the perimeter around the World Trade Center site and directing traffic. When Lieutenant Colonel Mike Riley learned about the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center, he dropped everything. He was supposed to take a well-deserved vacation that day, but instead he put on his uniform and reported to duty. As soon as he arrived at the scene, he joined the other firefighters racing towards the Trade Center. Their truck was the first one to arrive, and he and his team immediately began searching for survivors. Sadly, they didn't find any. Instead, they found thousands of tons of twisted metal and concrete, but they kept digging through the rubble for days, hoping against hope to find anyone alive. Firefighter John Miotta was close to retirement after 30 years of service, but when he heard the news about the World Trade Center, he knew he had to help. He rushed to the scene, donned his gear, and ran into the North Tower. His job was to search for survivors and get them to safety. He climbed the stairs to the 65th floor when the fire alarm went off and the lights flickered. Then, suddenly, the entire floor shook violently. The North Tower had just collapsed. Trapped in the debris, John crawled to safety while choking on dust and debris. But he was determined to continue helping. So, once he caught his breath, he went back into the rubble and helped others to safety. Firefighter Jim Riches was running to the World Trade Center when the second plane hit the South Tower. He stopped in his tracks. In the distance, he watched in horror as the second tower collapsed. He could see firefighters coming out of the smoke, waving their arms frantically to get everyone to move away. But tragically, the collapse pinned them inside the pile of rubble. Knowing that his brother, Jimmy, was one of the firefighters trapped inside, Jim refused to leave their side. For the next 2 weeks, he and other rescuers sifted through the rubble looking for survivors. Unfortunately, they only found remains. Before heading to Ground Zero, firefighter Chris Powell was having breakfast with his wife, Deirdre, who was pregnant with their baby girl. He couldn't bear to leave her side, so he asked for permission to stay home. But when he learned what had happened, he left without a word, rushing to the scene with his gear. He helped firefighters rescue people from the World Trade Center and later joined the recovery efforts. He spent 12-hour days sifting through the rubble for remains until his hand was badly injured and he had to be taken off duty. But even then, he wasn't done. He still wanted to help. So he joined the Fresh Kills landfill recovery team and worked there for 3 months. Firefighter John Feel was supposed to be taking it easy that day. He had hurt his knee and was due to have surgery the following week. But when he heard about the attacks, he grabbed his gear and raced to the scene. Once there, he and the other firefighters searched for survivors among the rubble. When they found none, they began recovering bodies. John and his team worked 12-hour shifts in sweltering heat, breathing in toxic air, pulling 15 to 20 bodies from the rubble every day. Weeks later, John developed severe respiratory problems and collapsed. He had been exposed to so much toxic dust that his lungs had shut down. While he recovered, he was determined to help firefighters suffering similar health issues. He founded the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers Foundation in honor of his friend, Stephen, who died trying to save others on 9/11. To this day, the foundation continues to help first responders with medical issues and build homes for wounded veterans. After hearing about the attacks, Wells Crowther knew he had to do something. He was only 24 years old and worked in finance, but when he saw the footage of the attacks on TV, he jumped into action. He put on his suit and ran to the nearest subway station. There, he met hundreds of other volunteers and firefighters, and together they headed to the World Trade Center. Wells grabbed a dust mask and goggles and headed to the disaster zone. He helped firefighters carry victims out of the rubble and directed tourists and other civilians away from the area. He continued to volunteer his time over the next few days until he collapsed from exhaustion. Firefighter John McCaffrey was one of the first firefighters to respond to the call. As he raced towards the World Trade Center, he could hear people cheering as if celebrating some sort of victory. But when he saw the massive gaping hole in the North Tower, he knew this was no celebration. He and his team ran up the stairs to the 26th floor when the fire alarms went off. That was their last chance to escape because the North Tower was about to collapse. They sprinted for the stairwell, but they were too late. The entire building shook violently as the North Tower pancaked onto the floor below. They had just experienced the deadliest building collapse in modern American history. John and his crew spent the next few days searching for survivors and recovering bodies. But the toxic dust and smoke made breathing difficult, and many firefighters ended up in the hospital. When Nurse Wellis Reddit heard about the attacks on the World Trade Center, she knew she had to do something. She called her husband, a New York City firefighter, and asked him to pick her up. He was at the scene, and she had a feeling she knew where he needed her to go. She sat in the back of his fire truck as he raced towards the disaster zone. There, she helped carry victims out of the building and treated them for smoke inhalation and other injuries. After the towers fell, she helped set up a triage area and treated countless victims. When she ran out of supplies, she went back to the trucks and gathered more bandages, antiseptics, and other items. She continued to treat victims for the next 2 days until she was too exhausted to continue. At the time, Joseph Aguilar was a construction worker working near the World Trade Center. When he saw the smoke billowing from the North Tower, he and his colleagues grabbed whatever supplies they had and headed towards the disaster zone. They found a group of firefighters who asked them to grab hoses and direct the water flow. They spent all day helping firefighters battle the blaze until the North Tower collapsed. When they looked up, they saw a woman trapped in the rubble. They shouted up to her, asking if she was okay, and she yelled back that she was pinned under a beam. They ran to the nearest fire truck and used hydraulic equipment to free her from the rubble. These stories are just a small sampling of the many heroic tales that unfolded that day. There were countless other acts of bravery, selflessness, and kindness. On that day, ordinary people did extraordinary things. In the face of tragedy, they came together to help each other and their communities. They were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We will never forget their courage. If you want to watch another video just like this one, click the link on screen now. With that, thanks for watching.